I'm Hayes Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today we have Peter back from Vancouver Rent It. We're going to cover what's the goings-ons in the December rental scene in Greater Vancouver. And so, welcome to the show, Peter.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me back, Hayes. We're going to be talking a bit about the stats to put some real numbers to what the rents look like and kind of how the real estate market's going on in general in December. So, let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll cover a couple other things like that petition that's been going around and stuff like that. So, let's get into it, man. So the average rent is down, as you predicted, in the summer. Look at you. It's only down $21. It's bringing the average rent for a one-bedroom in Metro Vancouver to $23.41 for a one-bed. Now, the reason, of course, why we use a one-bed, some of the listeners who have been listening before know, and all the new ones will learn, that's the baseline. We know that a two-bedroom will be worth more. We know that a one-bedroom that's furnished will charge more, and so on and so forth. So that's why we use the baseline of a one-bedroom. So this is typical for the season, for it to be down. It's been going. People are thinking more about Christmas shopping than shopping for a home. That being said, right now, being really sharp with your pricing is more important than usual, simply for the fact that you want to make sure you hit, right? So otherwise you'll end up chasing. Now, have you been having any of these longer conversations with any of your
clients? Absolutely. I've had conversations with current clients who were trying to rent their place, and also with new clients who are inquiring about renting their place. And personally, it's always better to be a little more realistic and tell somebody right off the bat, hey, look, the market's not in the best spot right now, especially since there's a lot of folks who are the real estate, the sales market is maybe a little bit down. So people are looking to rent their place to kind of tide them over until interest rates lower.
Yeah.
But because of that, it means there's a lot more supply on the market, and the demand in December is just not quite there. So definitely had to have some conversations with owners about lowering the price. And I've even got a couple places that are priced the same or maybe a little bit lower than last year at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is usually pretty rare, but it's been a pretty slow December for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely been. I think that the mortgage rates, which we'll touch in on that in a bit, have had an effect in the rental market for sure. It's also kind of interesting, as I said, with having to be sharp on the pricing, because I've been running into some colleagues and other people just discussing about basically the chasing. So using round numbers, because I'm not really awesome at math today, but $2,500, if you're trying to chase that extra $250, like your place should be renting around $250, like with the comparables and all that, if you're chasing this $2,500 and you don't get that tenant this month, you're out $2,500. So to get that extra $250, hoping that you find a tenant next month, you're going to need them there for 10 months before you get that $250 back. That's hoping that you get one at that higher price. So, sometimes it might be better just to lay up and not be so focused on that one number and just get the tenant in so that you're not vacant anymore, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Even to use a smaller amount, right? Like you're talking about lowering by $250, but even sometimes the difference of $100 will do it. And if the difference is $100 at $2,500 versus $2,400, I mean, it'd take you 2 years to recoup that lost rent. So it's chasing or not chasing, and just admitting to yourself that maybe the place at the current time isn't worth 25, it's worth 24 or 23, is just going to have somebody in there beforehand and not waiting. And what happens if you wait and then you don't get somebody the next month? Well, now you're out $5,000.
Yeah, exactly.
The number, can just keep increasing. So I think that's a really good point. And sometimes we have to have those conversations with our clients.
Mhm.
And, that your place isn't always worth what it was 3 months ago or 4 months ago or 5 months ago, especially when we're talking about November and December.
Yeah, because people are just staying still. And the closer that we get to Christmas, like 25th, it gets slower as we get closer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I anticipate that this is kind of the last week that I'll be doing a significant amount of showings. Mm-hmm. The week after that, and then the week after that will probably be quite quiet.
Yeah.
It's if you've got any last price adjustments, it would maybe be a good idea to price adjust this week in hopes of securing a tenant for January 1st.
Yeah, I mean, also speaking of price adjustments, as you touched on, it doesn't have to be that drastic. Like, coming from the sales side, if you're doing any reductions less than $10,000, it's kind of a waste of the time. Mm-hmm. But on the rental side, it's just a little bit of tweaking. Like $100 is someone's cell phone bill that could make the difference between your phone ringing off the hook or not ringing at all.
Absolutely. I usually recommend reductions of $100, and then you wait 3 or 4 days. If it doesn't make a significant change, another $100.
Yeah.
And there's no, on the sales side, I guess you would know better than I would, but on the sales side, I think, you're kind of disincentivized from starting at a really high price and then lowering it a bunch of times because people see that and they track that. On the rental side, nobody's really sitting around tracking, did that Craigslist post go down by $100 or whatever, and then they're not going to rent it because of that, right? That's not really a factor. So there's no problem to lower the price a couple of times. I've definitely lowered prices 3 or 4 times on a place because we started really high, maybe missed the mark a little bit. Maybe the owner wanted something that was maybe a little bit out of this world.
Lofty.
A lofty goal. So, definitely even small increments are good.
Yeah. The other thing with Craigslist as well is that they can't track. Well, so you could take the time to track it if you wanted to, but most people have jobs and things to do. But one of the things that it does is tells you how many days that's been on the market. So I find that every once in a while it's good to just repost the exact same posting. If it's been on for too long, if you've done a couple reductions, just take it off and literally put it right back up in a second. So it's day one.
There's a button on Craigslist that says delete, and then you just press repost.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very easy to do. And that's also another good way of kind of tracking prices. A lot of the time I'll have a client who will say, oh, look, there's all these places, all these units for rent at, all these high prices. And then you look at how long they've been on there for, and it's like 2 months, 3 months. I say, well, if it's still up there after 3 months at that price, then maybe that's not the right price.
Well, that and the fact that it's still there.
And the fact that it's still there at all. Yeah.
Look at all these.
Exactly. It is a little misleading to go on to Craigslist and look at all the places on there because those are the ones that haven't been rented yet. So you're not necessarily, I've definitely posted stuff for X amount of dollars on Craigslist and never changed the price, but maybe we negotiated lower. The tenant negotiated lower. So, and that wouldn't be tracked by just looking at Craigslist. So it can be a little bit misleading if you go on Craigslist and you think, the prices are insane. Well, they might actually be lower than that. Not always, but.
Yeah, for sure. And as you touched earlier on with the rent or the mortgage rate, that Canada has held their rate again with some speculation that they're going to start dropping around mid 2024, which may give some landlords some breathing room and thus may reflect on rents as well. We don't know exactly on that. And basically, they've held it for the last 3 options. So we'll see how this goes. They are kind of connected.
Yeah.
So
in my opinion, it's had a pretty significant effect. Last year in November and December, there was still a bit of a seasonal dip in the prices, but this year, in my opinion, at least from my experience, has been much, much more significant. Yeah. And I would attribute that to people, a lot more supply on the market because people can't sell or don't want to sell at the current price, so they want to rent it out, as well as some Airbnb rule changes that have been flooding the market with furnished rentals. People have a lot more options.
Yeah, it's funny because Matt touched on that last month, I believe it was. And the phones hadn't started ringing off the hook. Like he thought, the rules are going to come out and then the phones will start ringing. but it took a little bit for people to kind of get that. And I think that they had to digest this new rule coming in and then went, oh man, that's me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've fielded a ton of phone calls from people saying, hey, I've got a furnished place. And every time I ask, oh, was it an Airbnb? And they go, oh yeah. How did you know? And because I've had 5 other calls that week from this exact same situation. So, and just a little side note about the whole Airbnb thing. We've talked about this a lot before, but generally for a long-term rental, unfurnished is the way to go.
Absolutely.
Furnished, converting an Airbnb into a long-term rental, usually you got to lose the IKEA furniture. And it's not necessarily a positive thing that it once was an Airbnb. I've been scoping out ads on Craigslist for former Airbnbs, and the person in the ad has even written, I've got 4.9 stars on Airbnb.
Oh wow.
As if that's a good thing. And if I was a tenant looking for a place and I saw that the furnished rental that is now for long term, the guy has a 4.9 stars, that just means that the bed has been slept on by hundreds and hundreds of people. So I don't know if that's a positive for me.
I absolutely would not have taken that into account, but now, yeah.
I was thinking about it, and I just thought, look at all, and I've seen it a couple of different times. They say I'm a super host on Airbnb, and now they're renting it out for long term.
Yeah,
and those things don't really matter. And that's great that you're a super host, but you're not coming over to my long-term rental to change the toilet paper every week, so it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah, fair enough. Right?
So those two kind of things are a little bit incongruent. They don't really match up. But
that's like an A for effort.
Yeah, I thought it was funny, but maybe not the most useful metric.
So as we mentioned at the top of the show, the average right now for a 1-bedroom is $2,341. This is still $114 higher than it was at the same time last year. So although it is down, it's not way down, and it still is higher than last year. But mind you, only 114, so I mean, it's not astronomically high. Typically, though, we see the steady prices around now until February, March, and then they usually start climbing up. So if you're a tenant listening, start looking around. You might be able to get yourself a deal.
Definitely. So, the best deals are always to be had right now. I've definitely slashed prices quite significantly. Mm-hmm. Obviously there's the year over year amount. Real estate continues to climb, but there definitely is that seasonal dip that tenants can take advantage of.
Yeah, and for sure. Now with the average rent per square foot, though, which is not exactly the best metric, but it does kind of show what's going on in the cities overall. The current for all Greater Vancouver is $3.07, with the top 3 being Vancouver proper at $3.68, Burnaby at $3.54, and New West at $3.52. New West is gradually coming down a little bit. It's because they had the new ones. Everyone got their keys, and so they artificially sort of jumped because everyone's trying to now rent this apartment at a significantly higher mortgage rate than they were planning on when they bought it 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So they're having to choke that pill down. It's a little heavy. The least as is out in Langley at $2.25. So typical conditions. We're starting to get back to like normal. Vancouver the highest, and then the next one over, and the next one over, and so on and so forth. So
it is funny though to see. I think the last couple times I've been on the show, we've talked about it, and there's been a couple of funny little outliers, and we've pointed it out. I think at one point there was, Brentwood was the same thing, or it was the highest one for, just for 1 month, it just peaks.
Yeah.
And it's usually, like you said, because of brand new buildings opening up, brand new units, tons and tons of these units that drive the price up a little bit. And then it does normalize after all those units, or most of them are rented.
Yeah, absolutely. And no surprise, most of the rentals available, 75% of them are apartments. So the rest are all kind of split up beyond, townhouse and house and all that. With that, of that split, the 1-bedrooms are 39% of that 75, and 2-bedrooms are 47% of that 75. So it's almost 50-50. They're pretty
close.
Pretty close in there. So we've covered before about whether it's better to get a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom. I still stick with the 1-bedroom, of course.
Same. Yeah.
Although I wanted to add into this that you may be better off to find some of the older one bedrooms, because I've been visiting some of the new sites and stuff like this, and man, they be small. So I would suggest if you're trying to find an investment property, maybe look towards an older unit over the newer ones, because you're going to get a bigger place, which will, as long as it looks good, will likely command a little bit stronger of a rent. What are your thoughts on that?
An older renovated unit, often renovated, not something that's just kind of languished there for years without any love.
Yeah,
but definitely have had some pretty good success in a 4-story walk-up or a 5-story walk-up. The units are so much bigger in some of those buildings, and but the prices to purchase are much cheaper than these brand new units, and the rental prices can be actually pretty similar. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, the 4 out of the 5 most expensive cities in Canada, 4 of them are in BC as per usual, with Vancouver being number 1, West Van number 2, North Van number 3, Markham, Ontario is number 4. They keep on jumping in and out of there. And number 5 being Richmond. We got Jensen is one of our newer property managers who's just come in. He primarily works in Richmond, so I'll have to get him on, and he'll have to teach us about what's going on in Richmond, because I don't work out there myself that much. I don't know if you do.
I've rented a couple places in Richmond, but not too many. So.
Yeah, kind of a tourist out there,
Yeah, I 100% agree.
But it's interesting though, because as we touched on, with a lot of the owners seem to be trying to gun for that top price, you know what I mean? And it almost seems like it's like an ego thing, because they all seem to know a guy who got this, or my cousin's friend and wherever, Tuck or something.
That drives me absolutely crazy when they ask what my opinion on the price is, and I tell them, and it's not really my opinion, it's me giving them some analytics about what the price should be.
Yeah.
Not really my opinion. I'm not, making it up off of nothing. And then they say, oh, well, somebody I know rented their place for X amount of dollars. And, it's not necessarily an apples to oranges comparison, or apples to apples for that matter. So, just because your friend rented theirs for some price, if that's even true, then, maybe that, I'm not sure. It's not a good metric to follow.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, the other thing too, as well, is that you don't, as counterintuitive as it is, you don't always want to have that tip top, most expensive price, because you may get it, that's fine and dandy, but at that point in time, you're kind of dealing more with who's there, as opposed to having your pick of the best. I would much rather maybe be $50 off the top price, but I was able to select from 4 tenants that I know are going to be good, as opposed to the only tenant that showed up.
100%. My ideal showing scenario, one that I feel really good about at the end of doing, is when I have 5, 6, or 7 showings, 2 to 4 people apply, and then I can select those and let the owner kind of decide between 2 to 4 solid applicants. That's the best. That's the best case scenario. I love it when that happens, but I hate it when I'm just limping around, getting one showing here, one showing there, and then maybe we get one application and it looks okay, and the owner says, well, let's just take it because
it's been vacant for 2 months.
And usually that's the result of the price being too high. So
yeah,
in my opinion, it's definitely better to have more options, have more choice, so you can make an educated decision, as opposed to just a yes, because that's the only application we've received.
Yeah, it's almost like a feeling of desperation or something, you know what I mean?
And you definitely don't want to be desperate when looking for a tenant.
No, absolutely not, because then you'll end up at the RTB, which is kind of interesting. I've been trying to do a little bit of digging. I'm going to be doing some more, but it's interesting that I was on a conference call about 2 months ago or whatnot, and we were actually explaining to you that the RTB doesn't work on precedent, which is kind of nuts if you think about it. So you can theoretically have the same case and get 2 different outcomes, because they don't work on precedent. They just work on case by case by case.
As in case by case, they look at the facts of the case, and the arbitrator decides based on the facts.
Yeah, of that. when even though you may have the exact same facts on a different day with a different arbitrator and get a different result.
Which is interesting because they actually post some of the decisions online kind of as examples of precedent. But I guess that's not what they actually base their decisions on.
No, not at all. So, I mean, ultimately, we should actually do an entire show on how to prepare for RTB because it can be quite daunting and scary to some degree. But I mean, the main stuff is just stick to the facts. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. I've got lots of clients or a couple clients who've gone through RTB themselves with maybe a tenant that they selected in the past. I would always advise them to not bring up emotions or feelings or anything like that.
They don't care.
It's not about that. And I actually had a call from a client the other day he's got a pending RTB case against a former tenant of his. And he was saying, oh, well, they had too many occupants in the unit and this and that, but he's just trying to hold the security deposit for damages.
Yeah. And
I said, it's not going to matter how many people were in the unit. It doesn't matter that they didn't tell you that they had a second person there. Right? Yeah. If you were evicting them for too many occupants or something like that, then yes, it would be relevant. But in the case of holding the security deposit for not cleaning the apartment, it doesn't matter how many occupants there were. So I told him stick to the facts, and that's all you can do.
Yeah, especially and I can also understand that on the arbitrator's side because you're listening to cases all day. I don't have time to know about how you felt about it. I just need to know whether there was a hole in the wall or not.
Exactly, and they even actually cut some of them off. I've been on an RTB phone call before where the owner had presented tons and tons and tons and tons of information and even had maybe 4 or 5 things that they were asking for.
Yeah.
And the arbitrator said, we're only going to do the first 3 today because there just wasn't enough time to get through it all. So
and they are backlogged.
And they're backlogged.
A lot.
Yeah. I had heard some mutterings about them trying to add more funding to the RTB so that they can get things done quicker. And I still stand by that. I think the RTB process is actually it's not the worst thing. Sometimes it's worked for me, sometimes it hasn't. The worst thing about it is how long it takes for the cases to actually be heard. Like I just did one the other day that was from January.
Yeah.
So it took until November. I think mid-November was when the call was.
Yeah.
So from January to mid-November to finally get it. Jeez. And at that point, the tenant is long gone.
Yeah.
Very difficult to use the monetary order that I was successful in getting. And the tenant didn't show up to the phone call. Because why would he? It was a year later and he's lived somewhere else now.
Yeah.
So that's the number one thing. If they were able to do a 2-week turnaround time, which
that's a lot.
It's probably not possible. But in a perfect world, it would be a 2-week turnaround time. And that would be so much better for tenants and for landlords, for everybody to get their resolutions way quicker. But waiting a year for something, it doesn't really work for anybody.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially it seemed for the tenants as well. I mean, because that is on the flip side for them. So if they need to get their damage deposit back and they're waiting a year, they need the dough.
For sure. And I totally see it from both sides. I think that reducing the turnaround time for these RTB cases would be the number one thing that I would focus on.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that costs lots of money and manpower, and it's probably difficult.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned with the RTB stuff because there was a petition that I came from a group called BC Landlords or some iteration of that. Now, some of the laws that they were asking to change on it were a little bit out there. It's kind of like, I don't think anyone's going to go for that one. But what was interesting is one of the calls that it had was for the RTB to release the names along with the decisions. So some people don't realize this, but on the RTB website, you can actually look at decisions for various things and search for, damage deposit or pets or whatever may be, occupants, as you just touched on. But it's all redacted. And I understand with the privacy and all this stuff, but it would be kind of helpful for, I think, everybody, both owners and tenants, because then if someone's name's always coming up, you'll make your decisions a little bit easier. For instance, as a tenant, if the landlord is always at the RTB, that would say to me that they're always trying to take everyone's damage deposit. So maybe don't rent there. And then, of course, on the flip side with the owners, if a tenant is perpetually at RTB and you can see what each one is for, these are the decisions that are there and you can see the decisions. So that would take away from govern it more, I think, instead of just like, I'm mad at you, so I'm just going to drag you through the mud. Here's a decision from an arbitrator, third party. This is what went down. The end.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I think more transparency is helpful for everybody. It's never going to be a bad thing to have more transparency about how the RTB works and how, the people's names that are involved in it, because it is legitimate, right? In my opinion, it's legitimate if the arbitrator makes a decision and you can look it up and read it. Now, the only downside of it is maybe some people wouldn't read the whole thing. They would just do a little search for somebody's name, and they'd see that maybe that person pops up a lot, right? Maybe the tenant pops up all the time, but maybe it's because on the flip side, they've had bad landlords that have tried to take it. But
true.
So somebody may, if you delved into it, you would realize that, oh, this tenant is the one actually being taken advantage of, as opposed to the other way around. But you might have to do a little more research. Some people aren't willing to do that research. But I do think more transparency would be helpful, and it would create a little list of, the no-fly list for landlords and tenants.
Absolutely,
to avoid.
And I mean, with that, you would have to include the middle name, because I'm sure there's a lot of John Smith out there. So you want to make sure that you got that middle name as well, because you could just end up getting tagged. Luckily, I have a unique name, so I won't show up that much.
Exactly. That would actually be a good idea. Also, you'd be able to see maybe the property that they were referring to, or maybe like a slightly redacted version of it or something like that.
Yeah.
So that you could at least say, oh, this tenant has applied for this property, or this landlord owns this property, and then maybe I should avoid that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe make it better for... Do you have any other possible law changes within reason that you would like to see perhaps out there?
It's tough to say. I think for the most part, things are working quite well. I think maybe we talked about it last time, or maybe we talked about it off air, about security deposits and stuff like that being higher. Now, I'm sure a lot of people aren't going to be interested in that, but to be honest, these days, a half a month's rent for the security deposit isn't really covering much. Now, I'm a tenant myself. I paid a security deposit of half a month's rent. Would I have wanted to pay more? Probably not, of course. Nobody's ever going to want to pay more money, but I do see a lot of the time that costs are not covered by a security deposit. And it doesn't happen very often. I mean, if you're an honest person and you treat a place properly, you're not going to lose the security deposit.
I find most of the time, and it's interesting with a lot of the tenants, I work with a lot of good tenants, mostly out of laziness, simply for the fact that if I have a good tenant, then I don't have to chase them. So we all get along and everything's cool. But I find a lot of the time that our tenants will just say like, hey, can you just bring in your cleaner and that's that? And like, oh yeah, it's going to be around $300. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever, do that. And then they don't have to deal with it.
And there's no issue. Yeah, exactly. I don't really have many issues with security deposits. Most of the time I walk into the move out inspection knowing full well that the tenant is going to get the entire deposit back.
Oh, absolutely.
I walk in there, I just know, because I've seen the place doing showings or inspections, and I just know that the tenant was a great person and there's going to be no issue. It's in those edge cases where the tenant turned out to not be good that the half-month security deposit doesn't actually help that much. Another thing that happens is people skipping out on a month of rent, because you usually don't skip out on half a month of rent. You usually skip out on a full month of rent at least. And when you do that, well, the security deposit doesn't cover the full month. Plus, you usually need to use this. If somebody's skipping out on rent, they're probably not cleaning the place or treating it properly. So those costs add up. Although that's probably super contentious, and I wouldn't be surprised if they never changed it. But I do know in some, I don't know if it's in other provinces, but in some states, they charge a full month or first and last month. And
actually back east in Toronto,
They do.
First and last
First
month.
and last.
And here we have
nothing other than half a month. So that's a significant difference, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
That's something that maybe could be changed in the future, especially since prices for everything are increasing, right? So prices of contractors, prices of cleaning companies, everything costs more money. And if we used half a month's rent forever, then those costs would fall behind.
Oh, absolutely, right. And you have touched on like that you have a lot of good tenants and all that. What are some ways for landlords and tenants to make sure that they don't have such a fighting type of flow? Like you generally notice if you're silly enough to look in any comments on anything on the internet, which is usually a cesspool to begin with, but if you look through any of those, you notice that there's a bit of a line drawn between the two. And like most of our tenancies, at least I've found, is quite pleasant and smooth. And fine. Yeah. Like, what are some tips to help people start off on the right foot and keep everything good?
Yeah. I'm glad you said start off on the right foot, because I always tell owners or clients that. I say, let's start the tenancy off on the right foot. Let's make sure the place is in good repair. Let's make sure it is clean, so that sometimes they say, I'm just going to clean it myself a little bit, and then you go in for the move-in inspection, and the place isn't really that clean. Yeah, and sometimes it's a little hard to say, hey, owner, you didn't really do a great job of cleaning the place, right. To be honest.
Like, I'd take your deposit.
Exactly. And so, I mean, people always have different expectations of cleaning.
Absolutely.
I've definitely moved somebody into a unit where I didn't think it was that clean, and the tenant just didn't say anything, and they were totally fine with it.
Yeah.
And I've moved people into somewhere where I thought the place was spotless, and I got an angry email a couple hours later saying, hey, the place is actually a huge mess.
Yeah.
So there's always a difference in expectations, but I think starting the tenancy off on the right foot by providing the tenant with everything they need and providing the tenancy everything it needs to be successful is good. Also, communication. If a tenant emails me, I usually try and email back quite quickly.
Yeah.
Even if it's something super simple, or maybe I don't know the answer yet, but I just reply and say, hey, I'm looking into this for you, and I will get back to you.
Because everyone wants to be heard.
Heard, exactly. Yeah. So I think where a lot of people get into trouble is that landlords will just not reply to their tenants for a really long time. Maybe they don't check their email often enough. Obviously, this is my job, so I check my email all the time. But if you've only got one property, make sure you check the email. Make sure you talk to the tenant every now and then. You could even be proactive and reach out to the tenant and say, hey, do you need anything?
Yeah, that's a good one too.
I've done that before for maybe like a larger property, that like a house or something like that. I've reached out to the tenant and say, hey, just want to check in. It's been like 6 months since we've talked. Is everything all good? I'll also do this at annual inspections. When I go in, do the annual inspection, and also say, hey, tenant, is there anything you need?
Yeah.
Is everything going well? Is there anything? Because sometimes people won't reach out to you if it's something minor. And sometimes those little minor things add up. And then when you go in for the inspection, they say, hey, there's actually a couple things. I just didn't want to email you about it. And then if you say, oh, no problem, I'll take care of that. Then they go, oh, wow, thanks. I have so many people who are shocked that I'm willing to take care of stuff for them.
Which is kind of nuts if you think about it. Yeah. Like, why would we not take care of problems? That's kind of how you need help.
Exactly. I think it's entirely reasonable that if a tenant reaches out and says, hey, this appliance is not working, or this, even something as simple as this closet door is broken and doesn't open properly, just send the handyman to fix it for $125, and it will save you so much headache in the long run, because the tenant won't be unhappy. You really want to create a friendly relationship, because if you're nice to people, they will be nice to you and your stuff. And your stuff in this case is the property that you own. So personally, that's my style of management. I think it works quite well. And I would advise other people to do the same thing. It's the golden rule that we learned in preschool. Treat others the way you want to be treated.
Oh, I thought you were talking about don't eat the paint chips. Okay, that's cool, man.
That one's golden rule number 2, I
think. And with the appliances that you're just talking about, one of the ones that drives me nuts when I talk to an owner, and they'll tell them, oh, your dishwasher's breaking down, and they say, I've never had a problem with it in 15 years. Like, so you're due, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, you've just been lucky up until this point.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes things are going to break from use. And the other thing too, I mean, we always send out repair person. So we get a report back. So obviously if the report comes back that they tried to stuff a live chicken down the drain, yes, that's user error and we're going to take it up with the tenant. But if it's just regular wear, you're running a dishwasher, some people run it almost every day, it's going to wear down.
Yeah. And to be honest, there's no real way of, I have had clients come back to me and say, oh, the tenant must be using it too much. Unfortunately,
define too much.
If they want to use the dishwasher, there's no rules in the RTA, the Residential Tenancy Act, that says that the tenant can't use the dishwasher every day. There's nothing that says that. Yeah, I don't think you could put that into a lease agreement and say you can't do it.
Could you even that?
And even if you did, it would definitely be unenforceable and you probably wouldn't be able to prove it. So,
yeah.
Unless the repair person comes back and says that it's being improperly used, it's just the way it is.
It's the cost of doing business.
Exactly.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Well, man, I think we got through all of our stats and we aired everything and told people not to eat paint chips and stuff. So I think that's good for this episode.
We've covered it. Yeah, perfect.
All right, we'll be back next week with the goings-ons in Vancouver and a guest. In 2 weeks. We go out every second Thursday. So thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Please be sure to like and subscribe. My name's Hayes Hartwig. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast.